Hello, everybody. It's Joe from the MiddleGround Mike. Tonight, we're going deeper than any corporate press release probably ever will, you would think, because Campbell Soup tried to put out fire with a 3-paragraph webpage about 3D chicken, and everyone with a brain said, okay, but what about everything else, and what are you feeding them? Because this wasn't just about one executive caught on tape. This is about what Campbell's didn't respond to, what they didn't deny, and what they carefully tiptoed around, and what's hiding in plain sight across from their supply chain. If you think Campbell's fired the VP because he embarrassed them, maybe. Or maybe it's because he told the truth, or at least insinuated to a degree, the truth about some of their ingredients. Tonight, we connect the dots they don't want connected. And Campbell's, again, you are invited to come on the show anytime. Before we go further, follow us on Rumble, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, X, all those good things. Check out all of our media accounts. Help support the show. We're really growing. We could use, let us know what you think about everything. All right, let's kind of really dig into it. We're going to kind of start with, not the gossip, not rumor, the recording publicly referenced in lawsuit filings and news reports. And remember, I got to hear before there was only one other place, but before it really broke. On it, VP Martin, the VP allegedly said, we have shit for poor people. I barely buy Campbell's anymore. It's not healthy now that I know what's in it. I come into work high. These Indian co-workers are bleeping idiots. And let's pause that first line. We have shit for effing poor people. This wasn't just rude. This was an insight into how some executives look and speak privately about the customers they rely on to buy their products and get them their bonuses, right? People on fixed incomes, tight budgets, SNAP, WIC, college kids, elderly folks, working parents. And these are the people who trust Campbell's to be safe, simple, classic, homemade, and the VP is mocking them. And then there's this, it's not healthy that I know what's in it. That's a pretty damning statement from someone inside the company. Campbell's fired him, but what they never said was, actually, the ingredients are healthy. They avoided that topic entirely. That tells you a lot. Remember, it's about what they didn't say more than what they said. What they respond to versus what they ignored. Campbell's official facts about our chicken page addresses. They don't use 3D chicken. They don't use lab-grown chicken. They don't use artificial chicken. We don't use bioengineered chicken. That's what they said. Nobody accused them of those things, at least the media-wise, right? That's what the executive said. But here's what they didn't tell you. The feed quality. We'll go on more into this, but a lot of what they feed is designed to make these chickens bigger. That means it's engineered. They're fed more and more and more, but we'll dive into that. So it's feed quality. The pesticides used on vegetables, though reduced, it's still there. And those vegetables, some of those things help contribute to the feed. Mick Farms, who is their chicken supplier, lawsuits. Salmonella test results, environmental violations, shareholder warnings about tomato chemicals, sodium content, additives, the VP's comments about product quality, and why the VP said he knows what's in it. This is classic crisis PR. Answer the easy accusations, avoid the real ones. The Campbell's exec proudly claims no antibiotics are okay, great. But here's what here's what that does not tell you. The birds are still industrial, tens of thousands per barn, which has helped contribute to a lot of the bird flus and things like that. You see dark lighting, ammonia buildup, rapid growth breeds, right? So they're designed maybe not like on a computer design, but they have been bred certain ways, right? And they get fed certain feed to, be rapid growth and boom, boom, boom. KFC went through something similar years ago. The chicken still experience the same conditions as a typical industrial chicken, right? Overcrowding, heat stress, rapid muscle growth that outpaces their skeletal development in some instances, lameness, the breast muscle deformities and injuries, right? From some of this. Family farms don't mean small farms. Remember that. It could be a conglomerate owned by a family farms. A meat contracts with families, sure. But again, so you got Campbell's, then you got meat farms, then you got the farms. It's like 3-4 places there before it actually gets to the, Campbell's. But the barns themselves, they're huge, they're industrial, they're mechanized. There's no transparency about the welfare audits of these things. Campbell's doesn't publish farm audits, third-party welfare scores, mortality rates, gross speed metrics, the transport conditions, the stunning effectiveness. So if you don't know, the stunning is when they stun the chicken before they slaughter it. So that way the chicken doesn't experience, any craziness. And it's supposed to be humane. Every welfare report that they've done, though, is hidden. Mick Farms is tied to the OSI group. OSI is massive, global, high speed, animal outlook documented. And this is where they have said, hey, they've gotten rid of people. And this is part of things that they're going through at MIC. Birds have been thrown, dropped, birds unable to stand, birds accidentally processed alive, and birds in some slaughterhouses are being 175 per minute. Think about that 175 birds every 60 seconds. That's 3 seconds per chicken. How gentle do you think that is? How precise? How error free? Now imagine that speed for 12 hours straight. And now imagine that's the chicken going into a soup marketed as homemade. You know, salmonella, right? In some of these USDA standards that comes from this, right? Because if you go too fast, more mistakes are made. Publica chicken checker, USDA testing, public plant performance reports. A Mick Farms Batesburg plant had 3.4 salmonella positive samples, but it's still within the acceptable limits. The USDA's acceptable limits are not nutritional standards. They aren't health guarantees. They are legal thresholds meant to protect those companies. A plant that is still within standard can still ship salmonella positive chicken as long as it stays under the limit. That's why they're so critical about this chicken when you get it. Like, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. They're shipping chicken to you that can possibly have a minute amount on there. Do you know? But that's the truth. That is the truth. And here's where this kind of goes even further, right? The feed, GMO, and the chemicals, right? So let's, now we're going to get into the part Campbell's carefully avoids. Their chicken is not bioengineered. Like I said earlier, the feed absolutely is GMO corn, GMO soy, right? And remember, in those crops, according to the reports, check the fact sheets. It's going to be in the description or go on the website under documents. The facts are there. This is my sources. This isn't me making it up. So if you see some crazy chatbot in there going, oh, it's fake news, actually, no, go to the website and look, and you can reference the sources that I go to. But so the crops are sprayed with, I'm not saying all of them, but there have been, according to some source, some information, glyphosate, atrazine, dicamba, neon fungicides, insecticides. These chemicals don't magically stop mattering once the grain enters the chicken, because what this does with the chickens, it shapes like their fat, the nutrients, the environmental impact, the entire supply chain footprint. Campbell's hides this because it's messy, and it's something that a lot of the public just doesn't want to know until lately. But let's talk about the pesticide problem, right? We're focused on Campbell's, but I can tell you that from what I do know is this is more than just Campbell's. Campbell's just happens to be the first one that's really getting blown up on it like this. Campbell's, let's talk the tomatoes, potatoes, wheat, carrots, celery, and onions. Campbell's soups rely heavily on tomato puree, potato pieces, wheat flour, carrot/celery bases type things, and onion powder. The tomatoes repeatedly listed as pesticide heavy by EDA, often grown in monoculture systems. The potatoes absorb chemicals easily because they're root vegetables. The wheat often treated with fungicides, sometimes dried with glyphosate pre-harvest. Sometimes, as from what I know, that most places are getting away from that or trying to. Shareholders, though, this is where it goes crazy, and this is where it could be in trouble. Campbell's shareholders have been warning their own company since 2020. Proposals filed by As You Sow demanded pesticide transparency, supply chain disclosure, regenerative agricultural proof. Campbell's response: corporate nothing burgers. Classic Campbell soups contain MSG, the yeast extract, modified starch, sugar, vegetable oils, protein isolates, and salt levels many public health experts call dangerous. We talked about that in the first episode. But let's talk a little bit about these environmental violations, right? SC Pet Foods, tied to the poultry rendering ecosystem, was fined for, because remember, chicken's pet feed, polluting creeks, discharging foamy, turbid wastewater, and allowing backsludge to escape containment in their farms or their plants. So this shows big poultry does not magically dispose of waste cleanly. And Campbell's never addressed this part of their ecosystem. What part of that is getting, because if they're letting waste just leak out, chances are they don't have great sanitary conditions in some instances, right? And that can be really, really, really affecting. And that means that's something you could be eating. And that's kind of gross. I don't know about you, but that's what goes through my head. But, let's dig into it a little bit more, right? 18, an undercover investigation by a nonprofit Animal Outlook. They exposed the harsh conditions. They've been in trouble for labor and wage litigation class action lawsuit recently in the last several 5 or 6 years. In 2024, pig farms agreed to settle that wage fixing lawsuit, as did Tyson Foods. So the chicken industry were in cahoots behind the scenes to keep wages low. Farmer complaints, contract issues, they rely on contract farmers to make their chickens. Your chicken business, Tyson and all them, they don't own these farms. It's like a franchising system. Remember that. And it's obviously there's going to be internal controversy over that. Let's dive down a little bit into the lawsuit before we go further. His lawsuit is alleging hostile work environment, retaliation, firing after reporting the VP, which is crazy. I mean, you're like opening the door. Audio recording of the VP rant. The danger for Campbell's is discovery. So discovery could reveal internal emails, ingredient warnings, supplier audits, pesticide reports, internal risk assessments, plaints, internal debates about product quality, crisis strategy documents, and this is what they're really afraid of people coming out and knowing, because sometimes that stuff can mean different things and it can come off a certain kind of way, right? But I mean, Campbell's, you've opened the door for this yourself, especially with your press release. Here's the price of cheap soup. Oh, there's hidden chemical issues, hidden welfare issues, hidden worker injuries, hidden environmental runoff, hidden long-term health outcomes that all affects what goes into your body. And Campbell's is not cheap for everybody, but it's cheap, because you use industrial chicken, mass tomato production. That's common to a degree, but it is what it is. Decide intensive crops in some instances, salt, flavor enhancers. Remember, flavors can be 100 different compounds. You get what you pay for, and they know it. The taste test explained. The executives don't eat this stuff. You can go search for it, right? Campbell's dinner, Campbell's lunch, Campbell's feeding my kids. You won't find it. There's no corporate pride in the actual product. And maybe there are some videos out there and I just didn't see them, right? So I'm not saying they never have, but because eating it publicly would force them to answer, do you really believe this is nutritious or good for you? The additive math kind of let's expand it, right? Break down let's break down what's one bowl contains, right? The refined flour, refined starch, the oils, the industrial stuff, the flavor boosters, the sodium bombs, synthetic preservatives, which RFK is trying to get people away from. This is not food passed down from your grandmother. This is food technology, right? We have the shit for fucking poor people. That's what feeds into that, because corporate marketing, there is something called economic stratification by product line. And what does that mean? High income consumers get clean ingredients. Middle income consumers get balanced products. Low income consumers get ultra processed staples. Campbell's is positioned as the low income product line. The VP said the quiet part out loud, even if he didn't say it in the technical terms. Was he wrong though? High sodium? Yeah, it's in there. Ultra processed? Yes, it is. Pesticides on some of the vegetables that has been tested? Yes, I'm not sure. GMO feed? Yes, it is. So that's where some of the bioengineering comes in. High speed slaughter on the chickens? Yes. Remember, that's 3 seconds per chicken getting slaughtered. Environmental runoff from like the gook and everything at the feed plants? Ugh. Like wastewater going into the ground, that ground is where some of this stuff grows, and that goes gross. If you need a real lesson on that, look up Chi-Chi's, man. Chi-Chi's, like the Chi-Chi's, I believe it was the green onion fiasco that pretty much put them out of business. Environmental runoff, like we were just talking about. Worker lawsuits, yeah, he shouldn't have said it like that. But was he wrong? You decide. I feel for the most part he wasn't wrong, but I'm sure there's more to it than we know. But that's my opinion. But what do you think? Public health, right? But canned soup is not the devil. There's going to be things in pretty much any preservative, right? But when it becomes a daily staple, it replaces homemade food. It's built entirely on ultra processed ingredients. It contains a huge amount of sodium. It's eaten by vulnerable populations. Then it becomes a public health issue, right? And Campbell's knows their customer demographics. They're not stupid. They rely on, the real transparency should be. If Campbell's cared about transparency, they would publish the pesticide testing, the feed sourcing, the welfare audits, the supplier violation reports, sodium reduction plans, the additive phase out timelines like a lot of other food companies have had. We know that a lot of this stuff has been going on. A lot of companies are saying, hey, we're getting rid of it. But Campbell's just, you flat out just told us, hey, no. Why? Everybody else is doing it. You can do it too. You can do it too without raising prices, because transparency would force the change, and change costs money though. What can consumers do about this, right? What practical tips can we give each other? One another, me, you to me, whatever. Compare the labels, look for shorter ingredient lists the best you can. And if it says something like some sate or date or whatever, if you have the time, take a quick Google of it. If you don't, I mean, it's a choice that you have to make. Dilute canned soups, add frozen veggies, add extra water, add beans yourself. Make simple homemade soups and freeze them. Onion, carrot, celery, chicken, salt, boom, you got some chicken noodle soup. Put that in your freezer. And when you need it, boom, you got it. Choose brands that have lower sodium and fewer additives if you don't have the time. They are out there, and generally, a lot of your store brands, the cheaper generic ones, they do generally do have not always, but a lot of them do have those options now too. But don't shame yourself if this is what you can afford. It's not a problem. It's about Campbell's needs to do the right thing and to put a product out that people can afford, that they know and can be confident in. You know, like invitation for you guys, right? Campbell's, come on the show. You were invited on this show. I'll ask straight questions. It's not that I got you. It's in the episode what we might talk about. But Campbell, why didn't you address the pesticide concerns? It doesn't come from me. It's from shareholders. Why didn't you address vegetable sourcing? Why didn't you address the worker lawsuit more? Why didn't you address these environmental fines that you faced and some of your suppliers have faced? Why didn't you address the sodium? Why didn't you address the additives? Why didn't you address the VP's health comments? You claim transparency, prove it. Come on here. Let's make national headlines. Let's make this happen, Campbell's. Hey, everybody in the comments, tag Campbell's in here. Let's get them on the show. We know that companies were doing these things, right? We know it because it was considered okay. It is what it is. The past is the past. We can't go after them for that because it's something that we all tolerate. But now that we know, now we're learning, and Campbell's has yet to try to make these adjustments. Other food companies are. So you're telling me a junk food company can do a better job at adjusting than a a soup company? Seems kind of backwards to me. It seems like it'd be a little bit easier for you. If this episode helped fuels your curiosity, let me know. We can do a part 3. We're going to keep going on this, right? We're going to keep covering it. We were one of the, I won't say first ones, right? But we were one of the ones with the, first episode that came out. If this helped you understand the bigger picture, hit like, subscribe, comment, because transparency matters. Share this episode, talk about it. Question ingredients, read the labels, hold companies accountable, because if you owed them money, they'd sure hold you accountable. No left, no right, forward. I'm Joe. This is Middle Ground Mike.